Welcome to another episode of Man vs. Marriage. It's me, the Q-Dog, Coach Rita.
Hello.
And back in the studio, not a limited time, but back in the studio, the producer, Ashley. Ashley, it's great to have you back. The only thing is that since you're in the studio, I can't go off the rails and get these episodes any longer because I will be kept in line. I realize that, and I will do everything I can to exceed the time you've allotted me. It is great to have my wife in the studio also, and we are going to give you another dose or a sequel or episode 2 of She Doesn't Think Like You. Because really, Rita, I think we kind of felt like it was necessary to kind of expand on those ideas a little bit. Because we had a couple of stories in there that kind of went off cue or off the mark as far as She Doesn't Think Like You, but they were great to kind of add color, wouldn't you say? So what I'm going to do is turn it over to you, and then we'll do a little more reminiscing about She Doesn't Think Like You, and maybe we can kind of paint the picture a little bit better.
Okay.
And we'll get it started just like that. Episode, the sequel. She Doesn't Think Like You.
Here we go. So I just wanted to add this insight to that as far as She Doesn't Think Like You. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the 90-10 factor. And what it is 90% of men, their response action is physical. 10% is emotional. For women, it's totally opposite. Is 90% of women are emotional, 10% are physical. Now, I don't want to say this is the rule of thumb because we're all different, and I understand that. But the majority of how men are is physical 90% of the time, and 10% is emotional. That's the difference in how we see things. That's the difference from men and women. And if we could understand that difference of the 90-10 factor, and that definitely will help you understand each other. So when we're thinking that our spouse should be, 90% physical to think like us, that's not what you're going to get, because that's not how she's been designed. She's designed that 90% to be emotional. 10% of it is physical. Now, for men, you're saying, okay, yeah, that makes sense. 10% of you is emotional. Your wife needs all of that 10% because that's what she is. That's how she connects to you. So even though it is 10%, and I know I'm using these percentages, but just follow along with me. Knowing that and understanding it about you and your spouse understanding, it's so opposite of what each other needs. So we usually give that person what it is that we need instead of giving them actually what it is that they are designed and how it is that they need what it is that they need. So by men showing up with a 10% of their emotional being, you got to give it your all. Like your 10% has to be 100%. You're all in that 10% of what it is that you can give emotionally, because she's taking that all in because that's her way. That's 90% of what she is and what she does is emotional. I hope that makes sense.
I'm trying to wrap my head around it.
Because you have to, if you think opposite, if you think, you are 90% physical in your being of how you respond, what you do, and how you connect. It's physical. Women are 90% emotional. Okay? Mm-hmm. You guys are totally opposite. And what you're bringing to the table is totally opposite. But you have to understand that difference from each other.
Is it I'm trying to wrap my head around.
I know you're reeling. I can see.
I have to make it, I don't want to say dumb it down for the guys, but make it more of a practical application here. So Just we both have 100% capacity to operate.
Correct.
Right. So 90% of the capacity that powers our wife would be an emotional fuel.
Got it.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And 90% of what 90% for men is physical.
Correct.
That's what fuels men is a physical act, physical response,
Right.
physical whatever it is, it operates through the physical.
Right.
And 10% of what fuels a man is emotional.
Mm-hmm.
So 10% of what fuels a woman in that capacity is physical. But if I could ask this question, can I use my 90 to help meet her 90? As in this, my wife, like sometimes she needs me to hold her,
Mm-hmm.
and emotionally that makes her well.
Right.
Emotionally that brings her up or
Right.
gives her certainty.
Right.
So whereas I don't really need
Exactly.
her to be emotional to me
Right.
to help me feel certain.
Mm-hmm.
If she needs me, I can use that 90% that I operate in and extend a hug, a hold, a kiss to her, and that can meet part of her emotional
Yes.
need. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I think I'm...
See how hard and difficult, I don't want to say hard and difficult it is, but it's really trying to understand each other and where each other is coming from. Because it isn't a natural thing. Like when you start putting out percentages and statistics and this and that, it's like you almost have to make yourself think like what it is that my spouse needs.
Yeah.
And we're not used to thinking how our spouse thinks.
So what you're... Okay, now the other side of what you're saying is... And we're just using round numbers here.
Right.
What we're saying is if my capacity to be emotional, a rough number is 10%.
Mm-hmm.
I really have to be all in, dedicated to that 10%.
Right.
I can get away with, not that I'd want to, but I could get away with a little less on the physical side.
Right.
There's a much larger capacity
Exactly.
there. But as far as the emotional side, since 10% is where it's at, I've actually got to be all in, invested 100%
Exactly.
in that 10% range.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Because you're speaking her language at that moment. You're
Right.
speaking what it is that she needs to connect with you on an emotional level, because that's all her. That's all who she is.
Yeah, and you're saying that 10% of me feeds that 90%
Yes.
of her.
Yes.
Woo. Okay, and that 10% of her feeds the 90% of us.
Right, where women would have to show up 100% in that 10% of physical. They got to give it their all,
Okay.
because then that is meeting it's meeting your husband's need in that factor of, that's what 90% of men, it's all physical.
Yeah.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Men are naturally wired that way. There's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. And there's nothing wrong with women being emotional. For some reason, we think if you aren't like me, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah. That's really going on today for sure.
Yeah. If
we
you're
think
not
different,
like me,
you must. If you don't think like me, you're against me.
exactly.
And that's like a big deal, not only like in the environment today, but like marriage wise.
Yes.
So I can see that, because if your capacity, okay, if you're being over analytical and maybe it's 80-20 for you, or
Right.
75-25. Okay.
Call it whatever you want.
Whatever you want to call it.
Right.
Okay. What we have to understand is our spouse needs us to show up 100% in whatever that capacity is
Exactly.
to meet their need.
Right.
And we need to be, 100% of 10% is a lot.
Yes.
1% of 10% is not a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So that tells me that though that capacity is kind of set at 10% for me as a man, it obviously has a really big impact on 90% of my wife's life.
Exactly.
Ooh.
And you're only showing up 10%.
Yeah.
And it's not by a fault. All I'm bringing this to give you insight to understand the diversity of men and women. We are so different. We're wired different. How we connect, what we do, physically, emotionally, spiritually, whatever you want to call it, we are so different. The diversity is, I believe I said it in the last episode, what you don't understand, you don't value.
Yeah.
So if I don't understand where it is that my husband is coming from and know that he is motivated, wired by a physical need, if I don't understand that, I'm going to say like, screw you, dude. Like that, that's your issue, not mine. Because
Yeah.
I'm not putting value into how it is that you're created, how it is that you're designed. What I'm saying is you have to accept me for me, and this is what it is that I need. So once again, it's all about me.
And then when you lead, like when each of you lead with that 90%, there's cataclysmic explosion.
Right.
There's friction. There is, you don't get me, you don't understand me.
Right.
And then it starts to kind of build this gap because you start resenting one another because you just don't understand me. When if you could invest in developing that 10% that's not as natural to you, it shows up in 90%. That's how much 90% it affects your spouse.
Exactly.
Ooh.
Does that, and that, like you said, do whatever numbers you want to do. Like I've said before, your relationships are unique.
Yeah.
I'm just giving this example of this factor that how men and women are so different, and we need to understand the difference in order to value what's in front of you.
So true.
And the ultimate thing is this, hopefully this will bring value and understanding as to what it is and how it is that your husband thinks. So once you start to honor the differences, once you start getting it and understanding it and knowing that this person isn't against me, this is just how they're wired, this is how they think. In the way that you think, you communicate, you connect, you begin to create a marriage of true intimacy.
Yeah.
You can't have intimacy if you don't have understanding of how this person thinks, communicates, connects. You don't have that. And like what you said, it's more of like a explosive relationship more than it is to connect.
Yeah.
So
if you're looking for that place of connection, and that tells you how powerful, I manage people, and I hear all the time, well, that's just the way I am. And I'll say, it's not the way you have to be.
Right.
It's not the way you have to be. It might be the way you are, but you can be better than you think you can. So how are we going to change that? And, one of the examples that kind of brings to mind to me is, and I'm so thankful that Jeannie doesn't think like me. And I know I said that in the episode before. Okay, but I'm so thankful she doesn't think like me and that she does have this large emotional capacity. Because for me, like, I'll go back to this. I grew up poor, okay, real poor. Not dirt poor because we had a floor under our feet, but we were poor.
Right.
And we struggled. And, if I ever got to go to the movies, I didn't care about nothing but going to the movies. I was just thankful for being at the movies. And with Jeannie, it's a whole experience. You go to the movies, it's an experience. And you get candy and popcorn and soda. You go to have a great time. And we would kind of war with each other. Because I'm like, no, the kids just need to be happy they're going to the movies. And then all of a sudden one day it clicked. It's like, that's the wrong way of thinking. She's trying to create an experience, an emotional experience that's tied to this movie or to a family event.
Right.
And here you are stifling it because you're poor. And it's like, if I didn't understand that, so I did not value it at all.
Right.
I just wanted my kids to be happy for what they had,
Right.
go to the movie, and go home. You know? So to me, when I saw it for what it was, it's like, no, it needs to be an experience.
Right.
And I opened myself up for that to say, and I tell the kids all the time, you are so lucky to have a mom like you have, because we probably wouldn't have a Christmas tree, and the gifts wouldn't be wrapped. You just get gifts, and I'm not a Grinch. I might be a Grinch.
It's just what you've been taught.
Yeah, I was just thankful. It was a little,
Right.
but I was thankful to get a little,
Mm-hmm.
and for her, that there's a great place for that emotional. What's the word I'm looking here? Experience with the kids, to teach them about traditions. I have my own traditions
Right.
that are good. Obviously, I had some that were bad. But tapping into that emotional, I could have kept warring with my wife, and it could have kept a lot of aught and resentment between us. I'm thankful that I saw the value in her creating that, or that part of her, so that our kids don't think like me in that area. I don't want them to think like me.
Right.
Just be happy with what you got. No,
Right.
it's okay to have an extravagant experience. And that I really had to go to war with that, but I'm glad it clicked to me one day that she doesn't think like you in this area, and this is a good thing.
Right.
Now there's some areas where maybe my thought process is a little better, a little healthier. So we can blend what we have.
Exactly.
But being able to grow in that 10% capacity, she's helped me grow in that area. And we could actually help one another grow
absolutely
in our areas, right?
Yes, absolutely. Because who else do you want to grow with?
Yeah.
And be able to really give each other that room to grow.
Right.
To appreciate the fact that you're coming to that understanding that let's grow together in this. We don't have it right, but we're willing to stick with it until we can accomplish what it is that we want it to be.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking that if you as a husband and wife you could actually design each other's 10%. And you can design it based on the needs of your partner. And then once you start designing that, it becomes completely fulfilling. Your capacity at 10% could at some point overshadow that 90% and be so fulfilling to your partner that you establish this cosmic connection, or however I'm going to expand my vocabulary, people. It's one of my goals for the coming year is to have a better vocabulary. But that makes a lot of sense to me, that we could help each other in that 10% category. Obviously,
Right.
you have enough resources within the 90%. Nobody's saying that all those are healthy, and
Right.
those need to be trained as well. But as far as meeting your partner's need, you could help each other grow in that 10% area,
Right.
and say, this is what meets my need. So please add this to your bag of tricks for me.
Right.
Please learn how to use these tools, guys, tools, whatever. But
Right.
that makes a lot of sense to me. I had thought I had heard the 90-10 when we talked about it earlier, but I didn't. I don't remember this.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of having to wrap my head around it in the moment here.
Because when you don't think like that,
Right.
if someone's were to say to me, like, you should just be 90% physical, it'd be like, what, like hugs? And you know what I mean? It's just like, okay, I could do that. But when someone says, you're 90% emotional, totally. Like, I totally get that.
Well, and that plays on the idea that, when you gals are kind of pouring out your heart and your problems, we just want to fix it all.
Totally.
Because we could just go get our hands in it and fix it.
Yeah.
Let's just,
Because that's the physical part of you.
Right.
The task-oriented part of you that wants to go in. And it's not a bad thing. It's just how you're wired. And if I don't understand that as a wife, then I'm going to constantly have like issues with you, always trying to fix the issue instead of me being like a grown-up and mature and saying, okay, honey, I don't need you to fix me. I just want you to like click into that 10% of your emotional part of you and just sit here and listen to me. Listen about my day. Listen about, what the kids did. How the dog got out. The washing machine broke. Okay, all right, I'll give that to you because Bill would fix that too, like first thing off the bat. Okay, I'll give that to you. However, you know what I mean? It's like they want you to emotionally connect with how it is that their day was, right, wrong, or indifferent. And they could have had like the most awfulest day. But if they could connect with you on that level, and all you have to say is, come here, let me give you a hug because I know you had a rough day. I totally understand where you're coming from. Oh my gosh. Like,
yeah,
there wouldn't be room for all this animosity and offense and anger and really getting on each other's nerves, because I've taken the time to understand you and where you're coming from. And it's not like you're coming against me or you're not trying to do something against me. It's just how you are. And I have to understand that and appreciate that about you.
right. And why would we as guys want to change that? Because we don't, when you have 90% physical and 90% physical, you generally have the UFC, right? That's just kind of how that testosterone thing, that
Exactly.
competitive testosterone thing works out. No matter what it is, guys seem to compete.
Right.
And there's a place for competition.
Right.
But there's not, as bad as you as women want that emotional connection, guys want that physical connection.
Exactly.
And
It goes both ways.
Right.
Totally goes both ways.
If we could, as guys, if I can even get better at it, when it's time to communicate with my wife, just take a moment. And for me, it would be, taking my 10%, putting on my emotional glasses and my emotional hearing devices, and just step out of that physical, come on, let's just get this thing done. Right. Tell me what you got to tell me so we can get this over with.
Right.
And just be present in the moment and receive what she's giving me. That's really going to meet her need. And I know when my wife is happy and fulfilled, my need will also get met.
Right.
In a very wondrous and joyful way.
Exactly.
And it's that yin and yang, it's that thing that says, I compliment you where you have opportunities, and you compliment me.
Exactly.
Because I don't want to identify them as a weakness. I think better said is where we can celebrate your strengths, because my strengths complement where you're not so strong.
Exactly.
So that makes a lot of sense.
I think sometimes what's might make it a little bit difficult is if you look at it at this end of it, through cultures, through society, through what we've been taught, from our families, it's like men are not supposed to cry. Men don't show their emotions. Men keep it together. So to enlighten that 10%, it goes against everything that you've been taught. To really connect to your emotions. So it even is harder, to say, what do you mean? I got to be emotional? Like, yeah, you do. Also, on the flip side, with women with the 10% of physical, I've come across so many women that have been sexually abused, a whole different realm for them physically is very distorted of how they were taught, what they were raised, depending on the what do you call it? The generation that you were raised in.
Yeah.
So we got a lot of things that come against us. And it's understanding and working yourself through, like, why do I feel this way if he wants to be intimate with me tonight? Like, why am I feeling this way? Why am I feeling like, really, like, and we play these things in our head instead of just saying, this is him and this is what he needs and this is how it is that he connects. Like, we play into what, just like men would play into the emotional part of, men aren't emotional. Like, that's not what we're supposed to do. This isn't how, I've been raised. I didn't see my father do it.
Right.
We could bring in so many different things, so many different other factors in that
Baggage.
hold us back to really be able to fully be that 100% person that shows up in a marriage. And this is what it is that I'm bringing to the table.
Yeah. So what I mean, to me, like kind of like what I'm hearing, if I could, sum it up, it's like those two areas, the physical and the emotional, they don't communicate well with one another. But when really artfully utilized, or when used in the proper way or employed in the proper way, they can connect very well with one another. And so that would be on us as men, first just to understand that there's a reason, there's kind of a biology to the reason you don't think like her and she doesn't think like you. And to be okay with it and not to really force it to say, no, you have to think like me. And then to say, well, what is there, taking personal responsibility, what is there that I can do that will help facilitate this connection with my wife?
Mm-hmm.
What can I do to improve this 10% of me, to grow this 10% of me that feeds 90% of my wife's being?
Exactly.
And I'm saying, I want to know.
Mm-hmm.
For me personally, I want to know. There's nobody else, that I connect with on this earth like I do with her.
Right.
And being a father to 7 girls, I need to be a great example and set the bar as high as possible to show what a good husband, how a good husband can connect with his wife.
Right.
And also for my son. And I'll be the first to admit that I ain't perfect at it, but my desire is to grow in that.
Mm-hmm.
Especially now hearing this, that I didn't put those two together. I knew the Mars and Venus. I never read that book, but I knew there was a difference. But and I knew that men were more physical and women more emotional. I didn't know to what degree, but that tells me how powerful 10% of my makeup can be. That it can affect 90% of who my wife is in a good or a bad way.
Right.
Depending on what I lead with.
Right. Exactly.
So thank you for
and
that.
And it has a lot to do with, like we talked about before, is deferring.
Yeah.
If you enter this in with the mindset of deferring, you'll hit it good every single time, because you've come to the realization that you're deferring what it is that you need in order to give your spouse what it is they need.
Right. And along with all the tools that we've talked about up to this point, there's a lot of power in learning how to listen, learning how to stop the conversation in your head so your wife can tell you what she needs or attempt to tell you.
Right.
And then asking the right question. Not saying you shouldn't feel that way. Well, you're emotional, so you can't feel that way. Coach
Right.
Rita said you can't do it. I don't recommend going out and doing that.
Me neither.
But I do recommend, using the tools that we are giving you to understand how you can better grow that 10% of who you are,
Right.
that has such an enormous impact on who your wife is.
Exactly.
And we've given you some really great tools as far as, what did you hear me say? Deferring, listening, remembering, being present in the moment, unplugging. There's a lot of rich information in these past episodes
Right.
that can help get you on the path to that.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree?
I Totally agree.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, we're going to wrap this thing up here real quick. I wanted to talk about something. I was listening yesterday, kind of getting refreshed and prepared for, today's episode. And we were on a family drive, so I decided to plug it in, and everybody got to listen to, episode 12.
Oh,
So one of the things that we had talked about was the speed bump. And we explained speed bump really good we explained it out for Jeannie in that terminology. But going to the clouds, somebody in the car that was riding with us was like, what does going to the clouds mean?
oh.
So it gave me an opportunity to say, hey, we should explain that because people
Right.
might not understand. So as I said in like episode 000, I'm a dreamer. I'm a huge dreamer. I love to dream. And for me, there was a point in mine and Jeannie's marriage where she has this need for certainty, this concrete need for certainty. And me being a dreamer, I would just blast off like a rocket with these crazy ideas that I would have. And that's a way for me as a creative individual to really stretch myself, to see what's possible. It's like an exercise you go through as a dreamer because it fulfills you. It makes you feel alive to get that dreaming, just to dream as big as you can.
Right.
So for me, that was what we had established, and you kind of coined the phrase of just be willing to go to the clouds with Quincy. Be willing to go up and dream. And there's adventure in uncertainty. There's a lot of adventure there,
Right.
and so I would go to the clouds and then take my slow descent back from the heavens to the earth. And then reality, the closer I get to the ground, the more reality comes and says, well, it was a good thought, but maybe I'll start a little smaller. But it's an exercise for me because I'm such a futuristic, forward-thinking type person that I need those opportunities to stretch myself. And during that time, she would always give me a phrase that would drive me absolutely bananas. The glitch. Here's the glitch. Here's the glitch. And I'm like, I never want to hear this word again. Because she was constantly shutting me down for her need for certainty.
Exactly.
And there is a lot of uncertainty in us dreamers, and we thrive on it. But I just want to take the opportunity to explain what going to the cloud means.
That's good.
And you, as in your marriage, guys, you will start to come up with some terminology that helps, these buzzwords, I call them, that helps you two communicate with each other. Because it's easier to say a word than maybe to say an entire phrase. Because when you throw that word out there, it just comes across, it's a lot easier to get out than a whole train sentence that could be taken the wrong way.
Right.
So it's like, when I say this, here's what I mean. So please remember, and it helps. So now we talk about going to the clouds, or we talk about a speed bump, and it's put a lot of cohesive activity between our lives.
Because you know exactly where each other's coming from.
That's right. That's right. And now we value that about
Right.
each other.
Right.
We value that, so we'll honor it. We'll respect
Exactly.
it. We have a lot of acceptance for that. So now we can take it, we can let that person be that person.
Exactly. And that's
you
the
know.
goal.
And she can nudge me towards certainty, and I can nudge her towards uncertainty.
Right.
But together,
It works.
It works. That's right.
Yep.
So, hey, why don't you reach out to us at manvsmarriagepodcast@gmail.com if you have any questions. We'd love to hear what you thought of the 90-10 principle today, good, bad, or indifferent. And we also want to know, one of the biggest questions we have is, how can we help? That's what we're here for. We're here to help reform and just redesign what people think about marriage and how good it can be, because it can be as good as you want it to be. So check us out on Twitter at MVSM Podcast. Facebook, come join the group. Join the group. Somebody else say join the group. Tell them, Rita.
Join the group.
May the force be with you. All right. Yeah. Check us out there. It's facebook.com/Man vs. Marriage Podcast. Man vs. Marriage Podcast. And until the next episode, we'll see you then.